All right, Buzz, here we go. Another VNR.
Here we go. Back at it. Back in action.
So this will be an interesting introduction into a useful topic for everybody. And not to make this some sort of cathartic episode for myself, but recently lost my father, and that experience, has all the normal range of emotions. But that experience, based upon how my mind works, what I do for a full-time living, I'm always thinking health and fitness and all this. It was tough not to kind of sift through the ashes, so to speak, and think about, what got us here, what gets most people there, what gives people the highest quality of life. Could anything have been changed or avoided? And in his particular case, some things could not have been avoided. He had lung cancer, he's a lifelong smoker. And so that's kind of, you play the hand you're dealt with that. But on top of that, just looking at it from an emotionless standpoint, for my entire existence that I knew him, he was sedentary, inactive, and let's just say that there was room for improvement on the nutrition front, which is say that would be a kind way to say it. So even if that had been present, absent of any lifelong cigarette smoking, I don't feel he would have had a high quality of life, high functional capacity down the road. And it just kind of got me thinking, depending upon what you want out of your strength and conditioning program, what do you want out of CrossFit? If you want to be a games athlete, you're going to have to do a lot. And it's going to take a ton of time of your life and your daily schedule. But that's not most of us. And if you're somebody that's just a regular human being, and I would lump myself into that category, I would also lump police officers, first responders, et cetera, former military myself, so I understand the demands of that job. I think it's amazing how little time is actually needed out of your busy day to be not just kind of good, but to have a shockingly high level of fitness and capacity that will serve you well. And I think people just forget that. So I'd like to just, for this episode, just refresh people's minds in case life's getting overwhelming, that hey, you know what? You can make some tremendous things happen with a very small window of time, and you'll be a beast. Your friends will ask you what you do. That's kind of the goal here.
I think you're absolutely right. And it's easy to lose sight of that. We talk about it all the time. When you're looking at a population that's really interested in optimization and really pushing the needle forward, it's easy to get lost in that churn sometime, and you start asking yourself, well, is it whole milk or is it regular milk today? Is it 2% or whatever?
Right.
Do I do the organic peaches or the regular farm raised? Those types of questions are great, and if that's something that interests you and you're far enough along with your base habits that's important, well, good for you. However, don't lose sight of the fact that those big buckets that you've already spent the time filling are probably going to be the most significant factors. And at the point that it starts to become adding to your weekly stress and anxiety, these small scale decisions that have to do with tweaking little pieces that are already so far along, I mean, I think you're kind of missing the point. That's my personal take anyway. And so, really, to me, it kind of comes down to controlling what you can. And there's going to be those big building blocks, kind of keystone habits. And once those are established to the point that you're not really even thinking about them anymore, you're doing great. And there's only so much you can control beyond that. And I think sometimes it's easy in the modern era for people to believe that they have absolute control over all outcomes, if only they were to make this certain tweak. And I think that's hubris at best. It's hubris. So.
And you made some mention in a previous podcast that I really liked, and I've stolen it several times, given you credit for it, that, like classic, beautiful CrossFit programming that delivers the goods is almost by design a minimalist program. Minimalist with gear, minimalist with movement selection, minimalist with time spent actually working out. And Nicole Carroll used to say something during a level 1 lecture that I really liked. It's like, well, don't hear that you're going to spend a minimal amount of time with a minimal amount of movements. Don't read that you're going to get minimal fitness out of that. You're not going to get something mediocre. You're not going to get something average. You're actually going to get crazy levels of physical capacity because of what we're going to do with functional movements, because of what we're going to do with intensity, because of how we're going to have this interplay between these movements to deliver such a broad depth of capacity, that I think that can be lost on people these days. Again, nothing against the games, love the games, following their favorite games athletes, doing so much work, and they look at maybe their very modest one workout that they planned on doing that day and somehow feeling that it wasn't enough. And for craps and giggles, I looked at the workouts that I did on Monday, Tuesday, and Wednesday of this week. And I am not about to podium at the games in any age division in any way, shape, or form, okay? So I am nowhere near that. But what's funny is...
Well, only because you didn't compete this year, right?
Appreciate that. But compared to regular folks, I'm in astonishing shape that, people who aren't, people who are CrossFitters know what I do, but CrossFitters don't give me a second look. There's the best way to say it. Non-CrossFitters ask me what I do, so it just depends on who you're hanging out with. So I added up the time I spent Monday, Tuesday, and Wednesday, and then, 3 different workouts divided by 3 to see the actual time spent moving. And it was, on average, my workouts were just over 19 minutes. That's how long it took. And so that's not a lot of time, 19 minutes on average. Most of us could probably find that. Now, that's not including my warm-up. Okay, it's not including a cool-down. That's just the actual doing of the business, if you will. And with that 19 minutes on average, the work capacity that is generated from that, it's almost mind-boggling, to be quite honest with you. Like, it doesn't make mathematical sense. And so, point being, I think most of us could find somewhere between 15 and 30 minutes a day. I think that's very reasonable if somebody took a real hard look at how they spent their time, whether it was surfing social media meaninglessly, kind of lost on Netflix, or just fumbling around, piddling some time that was unnecessary. There's probably 15 to 30 minutes that can be salvaged. And if you can salvage that, you have at your disposal all the time that you need to provide yourself, to the best of your ability, an amazingly high work capacity and quality of life that will serve you well for decades to come. And it doesn't have to be perfect. You just got to be in the game each day, doing some darn work. That's probably one of my larger points right there.
Yeah, I think you're absolutely right. And what buffers that is obviously the movement selection around CrossFit workouts. You're going to have a high quality menu, so to speak, which does a lot of the heavy lifting for you. I mean, obviously you still have to do the work, but just that starting point of, hey, here's a sampling of things that are worth your time to pursue and they're legitimate exercises. That's a pretty great place to start. And I think that at its bedrock is kind of why you can get away with so little. And the intensity finds you when you start to put these things together.
Yes.
It's even if you're not looking for it particularly, it's unavoidable. Many of the times you're like, okay, I'm going to do a thruster and I'm going to add something to it. You're like, well, even if you kind of take your time through those movements, there's no way around a certain baseline of intensity that's going to find you and push the needle forward. So yes, it is definitely minimal. And one thing that kind of springs to mind when you're talking about that is just the importance of consistency. I think that is so impossible to overstate. And if you were to take that time, let's say the 19 minutes a day that you used as your example, and you were to total that over the course of a week, let's make the math easy and say it was 20 minutes and you work out 6 times a week, that's 2 hours total, right? You have 120 minutes there. So if you were to take that 120 minutes and say, well, I can carve out 120 minutes to exercise on Sunday, and that'll hold me over for the week. Even if those 120 minutes were all out hardcore effort, and that's all you did, all you did for the week, you're going to have a much worse result than that 20-minute touchstone on a much more regular cadence. And I think that's the real truth behind so much of this kind of keystone habit, whether it's nutrition, whether it's trying to get to sleep on time, whether it's working out. It's not enough to do it, well, I did it perfectly and for a long duration once in a while.
Mm-hmm.
No skill is developed and maintained that way. No significant aspect of your life is going to be well developed using that approach. And so to me, it just comes back to that baseline commitment to, I just do it. These are the non-negotiables. And if you can get yourself to that place where those habits are just so ingrained that, you're just doing them. You don't really have to think twice about it. The details become much less consequential.
And in what you just said there, you mentioned the word perfect, with describing either the routine or the workout. And, we've said it before, there's that phrase that the perfect is the enemy of the good. And I think that's so apropos for this topic, right? Because if you've only got 30 minutes and there's the workout of the day, you might have to make some sort of modification, adjustment, and in your mind, you might now categorize that workout as less than perfect, right? Because you've changed it in some way. But I would encourage people to think that modified does not mean less than perfect. It's just modified to fit your needs, your time frame, your schedule, your loading, whether or not you slept last night. That is lower on the rung of priorities than the fact that you're going to do something. The fact that you somehow made it work into your day and your schedule, that's the win. The loading changed to some degree. Who cares that the loading changed? You're going to do a functional movement. It's going to meet you where you are. Fitness is going to be achieved. It's going to be a win for the day. And, we were joking about this before we clicked the cameras on. And so maybe this will be useful for people to hear, or maybe they'll think it's heresy that a couple, longtime CrossFitters actually said this, is I hope people understand that between you and I, we understand the methodology. We understand what the ideal is
at this point.
Or somebody's made some bad decisions. There's an ideal CrossFit methodology in my mind. Let me say that. There's an ideal workout each day that if I had all my ducks lined up perfectly, this is exactly what I would do in the time that I would have to do it. Well, just because I don't have that time or have that whatever, it doesn't mean that the ideal is any less important. So it's okay to have an ideal. And then modifying that ideal, that's just what happens most of the time in life. And that's okay. And, getting it into your head that it's the ideal or nothing, I think is a dangerous place to be. So that's my caveat. And the ideal would be that you're doing a workout that beautifully raises your weightlifting, your gymnastics, and your monostructural, just gently and steadily over time. It doesn't leave anything behind. And you're a perfectly balanced athlete, and life is grand. That's the ideal, and we should all chase the ideal. And CrossFit very specifically doesn't want you to specialize, right? And negate some other things or bias your training or always leave something out. So we know that. And what we were joking about before we clicked the camera on is let's say that somebody just hey, I want to shut my brain off. I don't want to follow anything complicated. I'm going to do 5 workouts forever for the next 10 years. And so every Monday, I'm going to do Cindy. I don't care what my rounds are. I'm just going to do Cindy. On Tuesday, I'm going to deadlift. On Wednesday, I'm going to sprint, and whatever, and 2 more workouts like that. And it was that repetitive. Would you optimize your fitness? No, you would not. But if doing that, it was that or nothing, and that's what kept you working out, and I checked back in with you 10 years later, and all of your peers had stopped working out, and you were still doing this quote unquote boring, repetitive program, you would be an animal. Could you walk on your hands? Maybe not. But to some degree, who cares? You would be fit and strong, and you'd be doing functional movements, and you would be eons ahead of everyone else that made something so complicated or so tedious or so whatever that they quit years ago. And so, again, there's an ideal, and it's great to have an ideal, but don't be afraid to modify it or have to change it so that it fits your life and it becomes sustainable. Because if you're doing the best thing in the world, but you quit, who cares? And that's the quote I was going to get back to you, which I believe you said something along the lines, which I really liked, which was, if somebody asks you, hey, there's all these different training protocols out there. What's the best training protocol in the world? And you used to say, it's the one that you stick with. Because what's the
one
difference?
That you'll do.
What's the difference if you actually could quantify this one's the best but it was either so boring or so whatever that you didn't stick with it. And this one is okay. It's not an A plus. It's a solid B, and I've been doing it for 15 years. So that is kind of what I would like. I always like that quote from you, and I think people need to be okay with, even if you're falling short of the ideal, if it's working for you, you're in the game and you're winning.
Yeah, I mean, I think the all or nothing mindset in so many things in life can be just not useful, like it's great to have something to strive for. I think that fostering the belief that it's worth pursuing challenge, it's worth trying to learn new things, it's worth trying to get comfortable failing along that process. I think all of those are super valuable in many domains of life. But what often comes wrapped up into that is when you get so fixated on, all right, I need to make this next step. If I take a misstep, the whole thing is out the window. Well, somewhere along the way, you've let a wrong idea populate too much of your brain, and it's time to reassess. There's no magic in anything. And despite what people on the internet will tell you, nobody has such a dialed-in understanding of physiology and indeed the unique needs of each individual to say, hey, you know what? If you had done 6 sets instead of 5 sets, you'd be further ahead today than you were or than you would have been. I mean, it's just ludicrous. We have pretty good body of knowledge to make some informed decisions around that sort of thing. But at the end of the day, man, it's a moving target. And to convince yourself that there's these magical properties with what you could have done or should have done versus what you could actually do that day, given the circumstance you were dealt, you're just fighting against yourself, and there's really no need for that. And I say that as somebody who grapples with this regularly. This is not something that I am totally free of. I go through many phases of my training where I'm frustrated because I missed a lift that I know I should have had in the bank, or I had a time on a workout that I know I could have been much better, but I came in and I was, had a bad attitude, or I was tired or whatever, and it didn't happen that day. And I allow myself to be plagued by this mindset of like, oh, this session was a throwaway. So, my point is I'm not immune to that. And I think it's something that we all come to terms with from time to time. But you have to have a reality check every once in a while and take a step back and say, well, wait a minute. What actually happened here? What actually happened is that I got in on a day that I didn't want to do it. And I had other circumstances that could have prevented me, but I did the job anyway. I checked the box, I kept the habit alive, and I got out of there to do it another day. That's a huge win, even if it didn't feel like it in the moment, even if it wasn't, quote, optimal for where I would like to be in the future. It was much more serving than the alternative, which is just, well, I'm not going to do it at all. Or I quit halfway, or whatever the case may be. So, a little perspective on that goes a long way, and it's easy to let things cloud your vision. And oftentimes I think it's easy when you're further along sometimes, because now you've convinced yourself that you have to keep doing things in a certain way in order to continue to progress. So you can kind of get locked into that pattern.
Here's a story from real life. I had, maybe a couple weeks ago as we filmed this, there was a 7x1 deadlift day that I was supposed to do. And I was in desperate need of doing it because just life had thrown some curveballs. And it threw another one. And I was not going to get to do my hour dedicated in the garage gym. My wonderful little daughter, who's just basically like an insurgent who just places explosives on my schedule and detonates key bridges to keep me from doing things.
Yeah.
And so my 7x1 deadlift turned into, I just brought a 50-pound dumbbell into the living room where she was. And over the course of probably 3 hours is how long my lifting session took, because it was the lowest intensity lifting session in the world. I would do 10 single leg stiff-legged deadlifts on each leg. And then she wouldn't let me do anything for 12 to 14 minutes. I would come back and do a second set. And I eventually got in 5 sets. And then once that happened, I did some one-arm bent over rows with that same 50-pound dumbbell, and doing 5 sets of 10 on each arm. That took about another hour because there was however long between each set. And then when she was occupied somewhere else, I did just some plank holds to work the midline a little bit. And so I did this very long, huge breaks between everything. It took 3 hours. It was nowhere near the loading you hit on a 7x1 deadlift, but So it was far from the ideal, and it's okay to have an ideal. The ideal was the 7x1. What happened that day was what my day allowed to happen that day. And the fact that something happened, instead of just throwing it in the garbage and saying, well, can't do the 7x1, screw it, I'll try to make it up later on the week. That's a big win that I only recently have become good with and understood the power, and I did not get in my younger years of CrossFit. It would have bothered me greatly. And now I can honestly say that my head hit pillow that night, not feeling regret for missing the 7x1, but the opposite was true. It's like, nice, made something happen, good to go.
Yeah.
Tomorrow, that's a victory.
Yep. No, that's good. And I think, you got to extend that mindset to the other big building blocks too. Nutrition is an easy one to point the finger at. And it's one of those ones that I think it's a cop-out when people say, oh, well, there's just so much conflicting information. I don't know what to do. Like, yeah, I don't buy that. I think that I get it that there's a million different protocols out there and there's a million different flavors of the week as far as what is, the popular opinion around what's good and what's bad. But if you are able to read between the lines and you say, okay, well, what is it that everybody agrees on? Let's just see if we can get that under control. It's like, well, everybody agrees that processed sugary foods have no business in anybody's diet. Yes, sir. If you can avoid calories in liquid form, you're probably going to do yourself a favor. Like, everybody agrees on that. These manufactured frankenfoods that dominate the grocery store, nobody's going to argue. They're like, well, actually, they're going to be pretty healthy for you. No, everybody agrees that that's ridiculous and get it out of your kitchen. If you just follow those very key kind of core agreements and you did anything else on top of that, you're going to be most of the way there. Now, is it going to get you, 220 pounds ripped and shredded and lean or whatever? No, you're probably going to have to put a little bit more effort into it than just that bare minimum. But to get yourself to a point where you're eating healthfully on the regular, it's not that crazy. It's not that difficult to look at a few key foods and say, yes, this is acceptable. Anyway, go.
There's a potential rabbit hole. There's a potential rabbit hole here that I'm going to pump the brakes on going down. This reminds me so much of an episode we did early on, which I think was focusing on what's important. And I had a conversation the other day with somebody. I'm not going to use any names. I don't think they watch the show, so I think I'm safe there. This might be offensive to people, so I'm trying to tiptoe.
Is this somebody I know?
No, I'm trying to tiptoe across all these other things. Okay. But like you're saying, okay, there might be some conflicting information out there about whatever it is, but you also know that you shouldn't just suck down liters of Mountain Dew, right? I mean, that's there's not like a big body of evidence that that's cool. And this person who is, shall remain nameless, always has, that's where I have to be careful. Obviously, some very rare and unlikely autoimmune disease, like those are a real thing, and some people have them. But then there's some people that always seem to have a new one. And this is one of those people that, I see how they eat on a regular basis, and it's despicable. And the other day they come up to me with the doctor said they have a new fill in the blank. Like, as it turns out, I didn't know this, but coffee's really tough on the gut. So I'm going to start eliminating coffee from my diet. And I closed my mouth and didn't say anything. It wasn't appropriate at the time, because two things entered my head. As I don't know if coffee's hard on the gut. It actually might be. That could be totally fair and valid. And the other thing, which has also lived in my head, which was, based upon everything I've seen you put in your mouth, I don't think it's the coffee. Those two things were living at the same time. And so I think a lot of time there is this, maybe you don't know what the absolute best protocol is, because again, there might be conflicting information out there, but no one is confused about Doritos and root beer. No one's confused about that. And so if that's a large staple of your diet with energy drinks, then I'm not sure it's the coffee. Again, and maybe it is, but if I was a detective, the clues might lead me somewhere else. And it's kind of the same deal there. So we might, in the comments below, if people would like to hear more about that particular rabbit hole, let me know, and I might go on it.
Man. But I'm always down for Doritos and root beer. Let's
right. Getting back to the topic at hand. The other thing which I wanted to say, which was about, you've got an ideal. If you have to modify it, that's great. Here's why I think modifying it is so darn important. Is you've harped on consistency, and I will beat that drum all day long with you. And so what's going to help you be consistent, right? Another way of being consistent is saying, well, just don't quit, right? So what helps people not quit? Because every year that you don't quit, and every year that you stick around and you keep doing it, even if it's not optimal, you're in a more select and a more elite category of people, because every 2, 3, 5 years that go by, a lot of people fall off the wagon. And so if you found a way to make health and fitness a priority in your life, and I check back in with you, not just 15 months later, but 15 years later, and you're doing it, you are now a phenom. Like, you're going to be, there's more fit 25-year-olds than 55-year-olds. So if you walk into some place at 55 years old and you look trim and, your arms are filling out the shirt, and you're like, well, people are like, wow, look at that person right there, because it's rare. Now, if you're walking around the CrossFit Games, you see it all over the place. But in regular society, it's rare. And so you want to be one of those rare people. And setting yourself up to be one of those is just don't quit. Okay, so how can you not quit? And that's why I think giving yourself that ability and grace to modify, to scale, and to change from the ideal, and realizing that it's okay, will help you do that. And we did an episode a while ago, which I think people really benefited from. And if they're not, they should go back and look at it. I don't remember the episode number, but it was something along the lines of like, is it still CrossFit if you're not doing ring muscle ups and if you're not walking your hands? Something like that. And of course, the answer was an absolute yes, but I don't think some people, and my younger self, didn't appreciate that. So let's say at some point in time, butterfly pull-ups don't treat your shoulders well. Maybe they do. Hey, do them forever. But at some point in time they don't, who cares? Do the old school C gymnastics kip, do ring rows, do strict pull-ups. You're still doing a wonderful gymnastics pull. At some point in time, maybe kipping handstand push-ups don't treat you well. My wife's a lifelong gymnast. She just turned 40, and for whatever reason it is this year, kipping handstand push-ups, she does them quite well, controlled. They don't treat her well. She does all of her handstand push-ups strict now. Who cares? Now, here's somebody who might care. Somebody who is only concerned that now, even though switching from kipping handstand push-ups to strict undoubtedly treats their body better, they will never come close to their Diane PR ever again. And that will bother some people's soul and prevent them from making an intelligent decision. And whatever, and maybe it's not that for you, but I guarantee if you start to make these decisions to keep fitness a part of your life as the decades and years tick by, you're going to wrestle with something that's going to be tough for you to either let go or change or modify. And getting your mindset in, circling back to what I said all the way at the beginning of the show, what I saw with like my father's health slipping into decrepitude, I would encourage you to make whatever decisions you need to do to remain as close to the ideal as possible while making it fit your life. That's a win. That's the goal. That's the point. And that's what I encourage everybody to have a long-term view of their fitness, right? Winning the leaderboard today is great, but if your name's not on the leaderboard in 10 years and somebody else's still is, that person won. And I'd rather have you be that person.
Yeah, I couldn't have said it better. That's really, really well stated. It reminds me of, there's a famous jiu-jitsu guy named Chris Hauter, who was one of the first American black belts in Brazilian jiu-jitsu. And he used to say all the time that you're going to be somewhere in 10 years. You might as well be a black belt. And his point was
awesome.
Exactly the same thing. He's like, look, like life is going to go on. I mean, obviously, sometimes it doesn't, and that's out of your control. But, you're going to be somewhere down the road a week from now, a month from now, a year from now. If you just don't stop, you're going to be in a pretty great place. And that's really all it takes. more than stressing about the bells and whistles that go along with it from day to day. If you have the bandwidth for that and you have the inclination, awesome. Nothing wrong with trying to get the dials as close to optimal for you as they can be. But just remember that the consistency is going to be the biggest key, and you're going to be somewhere. So you can make those big picture decisions to determine where roughly you're going to end up. And that's really important.
I think I've got nothing else on the subject. I think that's a great way to wrap it, unless you've got anything else.
No, I think that's good for today.
So, closing, parting thoughts to everybody. Hey, you want to go to the games? Huge commitment, a lot of time, and phenomenal. We love watching them. They're amazing. You just want to be a regular person that is astonishingly capable and fit. You can get there with a lot less time, a lot less gear, and probably a lot less everything than you think. It is possible. It is within your grasp. You can do it, and find yourself a good community and some like-minded people that help you, support you along that way, because life is a team sport. It's not a solo sport, and they're there to pick you up when you have a bad day, which we all have, and you will be good to go. So that's what Adrian and I think on the topic. But again, we're always curious to hear what all of you have to say. So if you've experienced things like this, maybe trying to get loved ones to improve their quality of life through how they eat and how they move, if you've had more success with that, I would love to learn how you did that, because I find it much easier to talk to clients than family members. Let's go ahead and say that. So please post your thoughts there in the comments. We read them. If you're listening to this in an audio format, of course, we appreciate that. But head on over to the btwb YouTube channel, find this Varied Not Random episode, and post your thoughts there. And also, if you have topics or ideas for an upcoming show, throw those in the comments as well. We absolutely read them. Thanks for being awesome, everybody. For Adrian Bosman, I'm Pat Sherwood, and we will see you next time.